Pro tip, if you're going to go on a group ride, leave the death trap at home.
The Belated Binge Podcast.
Hi, and welcome to Belated Binge, the podcast that doesn't take itself or the show too seriously. My name's Zach. I'm your host, here to let you relive your favorite series that I nearly missed out on, like Sons of Anarchy, which I didn't watch for the first time until like 4 years after the series finale, after I had already bought my own motorcycle. Kind of thought, well, this show looks interesting. And guess what? It was. But before we dig into this episode, there will be spoilers and probably some language. There will definitely be adult situations. Wear earbuds as necessary. Shout out to the Bonus Binge Squad on Patreon. Patreon.com/belatedbinge. Now, you may have noticed in the past few Sons of Anarchy episodes that I have done, I structured them differently with the podcast than I normally would have, or that I started out to, or pretty much that I've done any other show on this feed. A little peek behind the curtain. That was part of me trying to be focused on video first. The YouTube audio or audience is almost all new people every time they watch a video. And on YouTube, if you want to have any chance of somebody actually watching your video, you got to be punchier. You got to be super quick to get into your topic because people will drop off ridiculously fast if you don't capture their attention like immediately, the exact moment, and try to pay off whatever it is that made them click in the first place. So I was trying to appease that platform, make all this video content and all that. And I mentioned this in a previous episode, but I'm going to say it now because you may only be here for the Sons of Anarchy stuff. That sucked. Granted, it did work. My videos were getting a lot more views than I was getting before, and way more than the audio listens that I normally get. But here's the thing. I kind of hated it. I felt like in an effort to simply reach more people on YouTube, I removed pretty much everything that made it fun for me to make this podcast in the first place. And then I replaced that fun with video editing, which sucks to do. It's not fun. And it was not a trade-off that I was willing to keep doing. So now I'm back to making this thing the way that it made sense and made it fun for me in the first place. And I'm talking like all the way back. If you've been here a while, you're going to recognize some of the elements in this episode from way back to the OG Harry Potter binge. The way I set out to make this show from the beginning, that has been and always will be a podcast, not a YouTube channel. If you're watching on YouTube and you enjoy consuming your podcasts with a video element, hi. It's great to see you. If you're here for super punchy, no rambling, get straight to the point, 10 minutes, concise, and a whole bunch of visual elements with things flying in and a lot of jump cuts and B-roll from the show and all of this other stuff, sorry to disappoint. The first thing that we're going to do, and just a reminder, I don't think I mentioned this, we are on season 2, episode 4, Eureka. And one of the things I was doing from season 1 that I miss trying to do and am bringing back for this is trying to essentially turn this episode into a rom-com. If you find something that doesn't make you miserable, just enjoy it. That's the message that Tara needed to hear as she adjusts to the realization that she, a medical professional, the doctor, has fallen in love with the bad boy, the biker. How could this ever work? She's truly not sure. But she's also not miserable. So perhaps she should just enjoy herself. This episode opens with a juxtaposition between the relationships of our core main characters. And by the core main characters, what I mean are we've got Gemma, We've got Jax, we've got Clay, and we've got Tara. That's kind of our core four of the main characters on this show. If you listened to Reaper Reviews with Kim Coates and Theo Rossi, they often referred to the show as having like 11 leads and it being 11 main characters on this show. But Jax and Gemma and Clay were like 1, 2, 3 on the call sheet. Sure, all of those things make sense, and I can understand why that would be the technical way that you look at this. But for a casual viewer of this show, Sons of Anarchy is about Jax, it is about Gemma, and it is about Clay and Tara due to their attachment to Jax and Gemma. So, this episode shows us our core main characters in kind of polar opposite worlds at this moment within their relationships. You've got Gemma and Clay that are still cold, dealing with the fallout of their fight, and that Gemma is still not comfortable. You know, she helps him with his cortisone shots for his hands, which I didn't know you could just have cortisone at home, but sure, maybe that's a thing that I just didn't know was a thing. She does give him a kiss, which is a nice warm up, I guess you could say, but definitely still jumpy even around her husband. And then on the other side, we've got Jax and Tara, very warm. Tara comes to the realization that she's his old lady, and she doesn't seem particularly upset about it. Surprised maybe, but not upset. And side note, I don't think I ever noticed the picture of the naked woman on the wall of their bedroom. Ever. Never. No. I've probably watched this show 4, 5 times by now, at least, since I watched it for the first time and never noticed that picture. The episode has 2 plot points that we follow throughout. One of them is the club who are going on a gun run for the Irish, which they've disguised within a rally for a blood drive. As Opie says in the episode, the cops don't mess with them when they're doing good for, the community, charity, kids, whatever. The other plot line that we follow is Gemma, who got a special package in the mail from her attackers, who are wanting her to know it was them, and they want her to be intimidated. In both cases, shenanigans ensue. We're going to start with Gemma's plot because it's more of the B plot and it's a little quicker to talk through because there's not a whole lot to it. It's definitely, there's a lot of tension in it. There's a lot of weight to it, but it's not a lot of scenes and there's not a lot of actual steps, I guess you could say, that were taken. The first one was Gemma receiving a weird package at the garage. Not at her home, at the garage. And this seemed odd to me. Did they send it there in hopes that she was going to freak out when she saw it and have an audience? And that was what was going to force her to tell somebody what had happened to her? That's why they're doing this, right? Like, because she hasn't told Clay about the attack, their tactic of raping his wife and having her tell him the message that they already told him, stop selling guns to people of color, it doesn't work if she keeps her mouth shut. This is their way of addressing how Zobel put in, I think it was the previous episode, or maybe it was one right before that. I'm getting a little bit off in my chronology, but he said the quote that they underestimated Mrs. Morrow, trying to intimidate her and let her know who they are and that they are in her town and they can do it again, is how they're wanting her to run to Clay and say, this happened to me, please help. But if they want Clay to know in particular, why not send this to their home? It seems more likely that he would actually find out about the package if it's there than dropping it in the mail at TM, where there's like a bunch of people that can go through the mail and things can get thrown away. And I don't know, it seems like there's more up to chance. I guess she could throw it away if it was, at home and do that more directly. But then you also have the element of we can get you at your home scare tactic if you do it that way. And sure, you could say they don't know where she lives, but this is a small town. Everybody can find out where somebody lives. They could literally just follow one of them one time and know, right? um, so, anyways, the clue that they did leave behind and the way that they are trying to get to her is by leaving the mask that they wore in a bag with the old business's logo that Zobel took over for the new cigar shop. So when she goes there to that building to investigate, Zobel's there waiting, just ready to be his smug ass self. And they've clearly arranged for this show of Weston coming and running into her on the sidewalk. He bumps into her and makes sure that he speaks, and he does it very politely, but he's making sure that she can see his ink and that she can hear his voice and recognize this is one of the men that assaulted me and get scared. That's the whole point. And then they have their weird bro cuddle hug thing on the that was awkward. The shenanigans come when she gets back in her car. And there's this lady that's rudely honking at her, wanting her to leave that parking spot because apparently for a small town, there's not a lot of parking and there's a whole lot of people, I guess. And Gemma responds the way that you do when you're confronted with these types of, call them minor inconveniences and squabbles with your neighbors. She points a gun at her. Yeah. And then when Unser gets called, she's like, yep, I did point a gun at her. But I didn't shoot her, so what's the big deal? Makes me laugh every time. Eventually, she follows Weston to some Aryan meetup, and she intends to shoot him when he comes out of the shitter. But she hears him talking on the phone with his son, and she stops. And this is something that I mentioned. I believe I did it in a short form video for TikTok and whatnot from the previous episode, where this show takes their villains or their bad guys, and just when they push them to the edge of just completely just irreparable damage to them as a character in terms of your ability to connect with them, they then give you a splash of humanity. Don't get me wrong, this guy's not redeemable at all, but he has a layer of depth to him that wasn't there before. Because in this moment, you want Gemma to just blow his head off. And then you think, that's the last thing that his son is going to hear from his dad. A form of encouragement after you called him to tell him some kind of good news that sounded like from a soccer or a baseball practice or something. And then gunshot and your dad is gone. Then you feel bad. And then you think, oh, this guy is raising children. Those kids are fucked. They're definitely going to be groomed. It's terrifying. But it's also depth. I didn't say depth was always happy, I guess. It's not always good coming out of the character, but it is depth and layers to the character. And Gemma doesn't kill him. She decompresses and has a short scene with Unser, who promises to not let anything else bad happen to her. Going to be her knight in shining armor, I suppose. Side note, again, he mentioned to Tara in this episode that he's known Gemma since she was 12. And spoiler alert on this show, he later confesses his love for her. And that's gross. An age gap isn't a big deal. It becomes a big deal when you talk about how you knew them as a small child and tried to stop her from running away from home as a child. Talk about layers and depth. There's a lot of issues that you could potentially unpack there. So the main plot of the episode is with the club, who are on their run, and they have a lot of shenanigans that ensue for them. We get a little mention of Jimmy O, which clearly means something to Chibs. We're going to get more on that down the road in the show. And Bobby, the fat boy on a fat boy, the fat boy that is completely falling apart, just starts whatever. The bike starts fucking up on the road, on the highway after they pick up the guns, and it runs Tig down and off the road, and he goes down and he goes rolling down a hill. Somebody else went down too, but nobody cared about that because it's not one of the main characters. And when they take him to the hospital, the front desk girl calls a bounty hunter who comes to pick him up. And this becomes an issue because not only has Tig been hurt, he's now also in custody of a bounty hunter. Like 3 or 4 of them, to actually be specific. And Jax and Clay have a disagreement on what they should do about it. Clay is hell-bent on delivering the guns before they even worry about getting Tig. Jax thinks that they need to get Tig as quick as humanly possible because they don't know where they're going to go, and he doesn't want the bounty hunters to get too far away that they're not going to be able to get him back, and he's just thrown in jail. This becomes hostile every time, and it almost comes to blows when at one point in time, and Jax is just asking for Clay to call for a vote, and Clay refuses. This is actually a specific pissing match that happens twice during the episode. The first one results in Clay dropping his bike out of frustration, I guess. Like, the cortisone thing was about his hands. That's a plot line that they kind of keep reminding you about early on in this show, and then spoiler, eventually it's just going to go away. Like, the hands aren't going to matter anymore. It seems like the hands were like the original thought process that they were going to use for the passing of the torch, or the gavel in this case, from Clay to Jax, but then the story got even more and more nuanced and more call it confrontational or whatever, like, however, we're not going to go into every single thing that happens in their relationship and what leads to that eventual passing of the torch, but they didn't need the hands anymore, and so they just kind of stopped talking about how his hands hurt. But right now his hands hurt, and he drops his bike, and those bikes are heavy. Don't see this guy trying to pick it up with his broken hands and just think of him being an old man that just can't pick up this bike. Those things are not light. I'm pretty sure the model that he is riding is like 900 pounds. You don't want to drop him. But he drops his bike, and then he can't pick it up, and he just goes and sits down frustrated, and Opie goes over and gives him a heart-to-heart, which we'll talk a little bit about that whole thing a little bit later in this episode. The second time that it happens, it results in Piney just taking off with the flatbed. Jax, Chibs, Half-Sack, and Happy all jump on the back and go get Tig. And it's one of the funniest parts of the entire episode. And one of the funniest parts of the episode that doesn't have to do with Half-Sack's announcement that he intends to get a fake ball to, balance him out a little bit. And this is the humorous part of the episode that has action with it. It is the 4 of them on the back of the flatbed with Piney driving, and they get to the motel room that they know that Tig is in, and they're like, okay, now what do we do? And Chibs looks at Jax and says, like, all right, what's the plan? And Jax is like, well, ask the old man, ask Piney, who turns out has a plan. He tells him to hang on, and then he whips the truck around and proceeds to back his way right through the wall. And Jax has the line of, well, it's a simple plan. And it works. It works very well. Ultimately, they get Tig back. There's still some friction happening, and the episode closes at the party for the blood drive, where Jax asks Clay how he's supposed to get over what Clay did to Opie and Donna. And Clay suggests he's going to have to figure it out for himself, but also do it fast, because if he brings Donna up again, he'd kill him. Which is kind of messed up, because I think in this moment you don't take that as an idle threat. I think you really do believe that Clay would kill his own stepson if it meant keeping his secret and keeping his place at the head of the table of this club. It's kind of gross. So that's the gist of the episode. While there's a lot happening, as there always is on this show, there's one character that I want to spend a little bit of time on and kind of unpack a little bit. But before I do, I'd like to ask you to please leave a 5-star review in the podcast app that you are using right now. And if it allows for a comment with your review, I would love it if you'd say something kind. Not only would it make me feel nice and warm and fuzzy and all that, but it would also help the evil algorithm let other people possibly new to this show have a chance to listen to it. And hey, maybe they'll like it like you do. And obviously, if you're on YouTube, you can use the comment section and the like button to achieve the same result, same request. Thank you. So let's dig in a little bit more on Opie. And I'm just going to say it. I don't think that he makes any sense in this episode. They've set up Opie this season to be dealing with the death of his wife. Obviously, this is a really big deal for Opie. It's very emotional, and there's going to be things that happen with that character as a result of something like that you throw him for a loop, and that I expect to see. The way that he's distancing himself from his children, and while I've said before that I don't like it, it's a choice that bothers me about this character. It's a choice that makes sense for the character within the context of the character. He wasn't around for 5 years when he was in jail. He wasn't super close to his kids. And without his wife, I'm sure inside his mind, he feels like he's not going to be a good dad. And at the same time, he looks at his kids and sees his wife who's gone. Again, I disagree with how he handles it, but I completely I feel like it aligns for who this character is. The thing that doesn't align for who this character is how he's dealing with Jax, his best friend, who to this point has only been supportive of him and expressed concern over his well-being and his family. Opie has taken this angle where he thinks that Jax is trying to take over the club from Clay, and he says in this episode he needs to get over his dead daddy shit. And he takes it a step further, and he even aligns himself with Clay, giving him the talk at the gas station, which does actually have a fantastic line in it. When Clay says some days he can't even get his dick out of his pants, and Opie suggests that that's what prospects are for. Comedic gold. Fantastic line. That's the shit that I wish stayed in the show throughout the entire 7th season. They get fewer and further between as we go, and somewhat forced at times to where they're not actually as funny as they could be. This episode is a good one for some of the camaraderie type humor on the show. Of course, then he basically draws the line of allegiance and pledges his to Clay, all the while being confrontational with Jax the whole time, and it just doesn't feel right for the character. These two have been boys for their entire lives. We've already seen Jax stick his neck out to cover for Opie with Clay to help his best friend. As I mentioned, Jax has been nothing but supportive of his friend with what he's been going through. And Opie has gone the other way, getting offended at Jax's support and pushing back. And the part that makes the least sense to me is that Opie jumps to the conclusion that whatever is happening between Jax and Clay, it must be Jax's fault. And it's Jax being selfish about something. If the roles were reversed, all the evidence that we have suggests that Jax would do the opposite. He would double down on his support for his best friend, whether it was the right thing or not. He'd do it out of loyalty to him. And Opie is often portrayed on this show as the ultimate example of loyalty. But he's being loyal to Clay, not Jax? It just feels off to me. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. And I'm sure that you could say to me that Jax not telling Opie about Donna right now is disloyal. And I've made my feelings known on that as well. I disagree with Jax's decision to do that. But the reason he claims that he's doing it is that it's the best thing for Opie, not for him. And of course, Opie doesn't know that that's what Jax and Clay are actually fighting about. And when you add that level of nuance to it, it makes it even worse. Opie is walling himself off against his best friend and cozying up to the man who tried to have him killed and got his wife murdered by mistake. Kind of sucks. The next thing I want to do is do some highlights and call them lowlights for certain characters from this episode. And here's how it's going to go. For the characters we want to highlight in a positive way, we're going to give out some new patches. For the characters that we want to call out for sucking, we're just going to do it. We're going to give them a big old fuck you. Simple enough? All right, let's do it. So for the patches on this episode where we are honoring characters in true biker fashion, if you will, I'm going to go with Unser. While his love motivations get really weird, in this episode, he is super supportive of Gemma. He's funny in his scenes with her about the gun, and he even goes and confronts Zobel directly in his way of showing, support and trying to protect this woman that he cares about deeply. Good on Unser, even if, I don't know, maybe his tactics aren't always the most thought out or work out the best. It's coming from the right place. The next patch award I'm going to give out is to Tig. The way he eggs on the bounty hunters and gets them to beat him up, it's just hilarious. It's, again, levity in a show that has a lot of seriousness and tension in it. And that whole scene is just pure comedy. And I quite like it. Speaking of comedy, the next or the final patch that I want to give out for this episode is Half Sack. Everyone wants to give him shit about wanting a fake ball to balance out his junk, and I appreciate him for the levity and the humor, as well as keeping track of Tig so that they could actually go get him. If he doesn't stay on them or gets caught while following them, Tig's off to prison, while our boys are back at the gas station arguing about whether they should help him or not. Half Sack is kind of low-key the hero, and he's on the truck to go get him, which, when you think about it, defies the president of the club's directive. As a prospect, he's literally putting himself out there to have his junk removed doing this, but he thinks it's the right thing to do to save a brother. Good on you, Half Sack. All right, so maybe we call these FTCs for fuck this character. It's pretty self-explanatory, as I said earlier. We're going to do this for the bounty hunters to start with, not just because they picked up Tig. Like, that's their job. Tig has an outstanding warrant in another state, and their job is to pick up people like him. The thing that they do in preying on hospitals and snatching people up when they're wounded, come on, that's a gross tactic. The next two are Zobel and Weston, obviously, trying to intimidate Gemma. I wish those characters would just die. The next FTC, to call it that we're going to do is Clay. He's always lecturing Jax about making things personal. And including at the end of this episode, he does the same thing about, your need to undermine my every move. Where does it go tomorrow? Next week? But he's the one that's actually being a dick because he's making shit personal. He's pissed about Gemma. He's pissed about Jax. And he's fighting everyone. Jax is advocating for helping club members and for following the club's established protocol of democracy by calling a vote to settle their disagreement. Clay is shouting and opting for physical altercation because he's pissy. But by all means, this is about Jax making things personal with Clay, right? The final FTC we're going to do is Bobby. You can't go on a group ride with a bike that's falling apart, smoking, and is putting other riders at risk. Those large group rides are actually incredibly dangerous. If one person makes a small mistake on the road, it risks the lives of the entire group. So the bigger the group, the worse it can possibly get. And he is obviously a very seasoned rider, and he knows better. His Springer that he normally rides may not be the most comfortable on these trips, but if your Softail with the big cushy seat is a death trap for everyone else, you put your ass on the bobber and deal with it being sore, and if you don't like that, go buy another seat. Just saying. Before we go, let us rewrite Sons of Anarchy one small change to the episode at a time. For this episode, this question honestly could change everything. What if Bobby didn't do what I just said he shouldn't do? What if he didn't ride his old piece of shit fat boy? How do you think this episode plays out differently without that particular issue at hand? If you're watching on YouTube, comment down below your answer to that question. If you are listening on a podcast player, let me know on social media at Belated Binge. There is an exclusive Facebook group for listeners of this podcast. There's a link in the show notes for that if you would like to let me know there. The best responses might even find their way into a future episode of this podcast. And if you enjoyed this episode, rebinging Sons of Anarchy, go ahead and give me a follow or a subscribe on whatever app you are using right now. Thank you so much for being here. And remember, life is short. Buy the motorcycle. And when you do, wear a helmet. Dress for the slide, not the ride, and make sure that you're taking Belated Binge along for that ride.